We've Johnny Ward in studio with us this morning. Johnny, how are you getting on? You were specially seconded in to get rid of Owen because we knew there was some serious political issues at play this morning, and you were really the only man for the job.
Yeah, I didn't realise it was Friday the 13th. It makes a lot of sense, actually, when you wake up to the reality of Donald Trump and Boris Johnson as the elected leaders of the two great or formerly great Western powers, two utter buffoons elected by the people. It's a worrying day for democracy. I know they wanted to get Brexit done, but could you vote for Boris Johnson, the guy who was hiding in a fridge from a reporter the other day?
Yeah, well, I mean, the vast majority of Britain weren't, as frequently these things play out, they weren't necessarily voting for Boris Johnson.
They're voting for Brexit.
Well, you vote on your, I like this guy rather than that guy, and whatever party they are. Like, it's not always sort of with Boris Johnson in mind that somebody cast their vote for the Conservatives. That's the fortunate or unfortunate, whatever way you want to look at it. And interesting, no doubt.
There were alternatives to Corbyn, though. Do you know what I mean? If you didn't want to vote Corbyn. But I think United Ireland, I would say, almost looks more likely than not now at this stage, or certainly in my lifetime, because Scotland will surely vote for independence after the SNP's vote. Unionists in the north have a strong tie to Scotland historically, and if Scotland is taken away from the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland is a basket case economically as it is. It has absolutely no reason to support the UK economically because it's fallen. About the GDP in the north is about half what it is in the south now. So that's been a massive transformation, whereas at the start of 100 years ago, Dublin was miles behind Belfast. That's completely changed.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited and energised by that, and the fact that the DUP, the unionist vote, certainly they're going to be more nationalist seats than unionist seats in Northern Ireland. Now that may not always be the case, but I'm very energised by that. I think United Ireland probably will happen now, but in terms of the people in Britain, what they voted for last night, I think democracy is in a pretty questionable place at the moment.
I would be far from somebody who would be in any position to comment on any of these things. But
I'm not. Neither am I. But I'm just a normal voter like yourself.
The only thing that I saw last night was that somebody was actually making the point that the Conservatives actually now, and the vast majority, we'll stop talking politics in a second, by the way, for anybody who's totally disinterested about it.
It's the first hour of the show.
The vast majority of the fact that the Conservatives have won a landslide, massive majority in the House now, that actually their policies will have to be more centrist than they had initially outlined, and that they can't necessarily tax the hell out of the high polloi, the great unwashed, that actually they're going to have to engage with, because they have a mandate for everybody now, that it wasn't just the upper and middle classes that have voted them in.
That's Dave McWilliams made that point there last night, which I think may well be valid, because they've won seats where traditionally they would never have won seats, and it's almost like John Finucane representing the people of North Belfast. He has a mandate for people. John Finucane must have been voted for by moderate Protestants or moderate Unionists, because otherwise why would he have gotten the vote? But you just hope that Boris kind of chills out a bit on some of his pronouncements, because the more I read in it, his promises on Brexit aren't really achievable in the time frame. But I think the overwhelming thing about this vote was that British people are fed up with Brexit and just want to get it out of the way and get on with their lives. And Corbyn obviously was procrastinating on that and talking of a second referendum. But I still think it's deeply worrying that a guy that, I mean, if you were having a pint with Kim Jong-un, Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, you'd think, like, who the hell are these people? They're like, these guys are crazy. But they're leading like a new country and the two great powers in the West, or the two great former powers. It's actually quite frightening.
Do you think Kim Jong-un will be into a pint?
His father was big into cognac, massive. I think he loved his cognac. I'd say he likes the finer things in life. He looks like he does, doesn't he?
I mean,
While
a pint,
people starve.
Specifically,
pint of Guinness. I mean, who wouldn't? I'd say Bojo would like pint of Guinness. Trump would like a pint. Do you like a pint of Guinness?
I wouldn't mind a pint of Guinness right now. Yeah.
Right now, it's 7:30 in the morning, Adrian.
Speaking of sort of things that people want out of their lives and to move on with their life, the Dublin footballers have a new manager. There's another thing that you were, I'm sure, very excited about last night. Dessie come in. I'm sure that you would have been living on sort of planet Zog to have not spotted this one over the last 18 hours thereabouts. The Dublin County Board convened last night. Whispers started to emerge about 2 hours before the 7 o'clock meeting that Dessie Farr was going to get the gig, and that's exactly what happened. He's got in a 3-year term. A lot of positive soundings out of some of the old guard in Dublin, some of whom who would have played alongside him. Yet to reveal his backroom staff. Some indication that McGavin might be amongst those. Some indication that from Shane Hannon in a conversation with some of the Dublin administrators down at Parnell Park last night, that also some of Jim Gavin's backroom staff are going to stay on. Obviously, who they will be, we will see. Jason Sherlock was obviously a former teammate of Dessie's as well. So yeah, interesting times. Like, whether, I suppose we'll get to see whether Jim was a genius or not over the next few years. Yeah,
that might be a little bit harsh because, you know, sometimes circumstances happen and the stars align, and it's a great job, but it's also like you know, you're taking over from a legend. What more can you achieve? But I think from Dublin's perspective, the shock of, when you consider the shock of the resignation, they've gotten this done pretty quickly. Now, it would have been a job that lots of people wanted. Like, compare that to the Galway situation in the hurling, where they've gone on, the players more or less had to start training themselves because. So I think it'll be seamless. It probably does give the others a bit of hope because whatever Jim had and the way he delegated responsibility and trust to the players, he had something very special. So it's. With all due respect to Jim Gavin, his departure is probably good for football in the greater sense because people are definitely fed up with Dublin winning all the time. And you know, Damien Delaney during the week, he's like, I wouldn't really watch football now, only certain games. I think a lot of people are like that. As much as I think football is actually in a great place in many ways, just think Dublin are too dominant for the general interest. A bit like Kenny dragging the standards up, but people got fed up with them winning.
Yeah,
same as in racing.
Were, but I mean, like, what are they on about? When you're alive at a time when there's a team as dominant as Kilkenny, as dominant as Dublin, and as annoying as it might be if you're from a very limited number of counties, if you're a Kerry, Mayo, for example, Galway to a degree, I'm sure that's frustrating, but like for people like myself who wouldn't have any vested interest and are not going to have it anytime soon, I think that, like, it's unbelievable to be alive at a time where you're seeing such dominance. A team that's going to be spoken about for years. By the way, he's got 6 weeks before the league starts.
Unbelievable, yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, that's
bang, bang.
And first up, Kerry. Like, this is not a this is a very tight turnaround. That was the one shock for me when everybody was talking about Gavin and whether he was going to stay on or not. I thought, surely he's not leaving it this late. Like, he's not giving the next guy in.
Yeah, like, I suppose that it obviously would prompt some questions as to why he did it at that time. But I obviously Jim has a lot going on in terms of his work life and all that. But like that Dublin Kerry game becomes really fascinating now because Kerry obviously were close to them. Kerry will have their motivation up, and it builds into the league very nicely. Yeah. And you know, if you look at the league and the change of the structures, the league will be a lot more interesting to people than a vast portion of the championship this year because they're competitive games. And you're from Leinster, obviously, you can attest to the dead rubber that's become. So that game looks fascinating now, and it's a nice little build up for the GAA to kind of promote the league going into that Dublin Kerry game. Is that in Croke Park?
I'm not sure, actually.
Yeah. So if that game were in Croke Park, you could see a huge crowd at it. I'd say.
The only difficulty is, does it? I mean, to a degree, does it really matter what happens? Like, what I'm saying is, you could easily see Kerry go on and win the thing, and then what sort of relevance that'll have.
Yeah, Tyrone won in Croke Park last year, and that didn't matter.
This is in Croke Park as well, by the way.
Yeah. So you could imagine there'll be a huge crowd at that with a lot of what's this Dublin team going to be like, and it'll be fascinating. I don't know Dessie, but I mean, it was pretty obvious that he was the odds-on favourite from the get-go.
Not many people do, is the thing. He's kind of post-GPA. We've not really seen very much of him, is the one thing. We're going to have plenty of conversation.
Sounds like a Dublin manager then, doesn't he?
Yeah, I know, but I'm not going to hear very much of it. That might continue, to be fair. Plenty of conversation about Dessie as the morning unfolds. We've also got a very big quarter-final for you this morning. Anybody's been paying attention over the last few weeks as we search for Irish sports moment of the decade.
There's a lot of ball. There is a goal! Robbie Brady!
Most memorable moment of the decade, of course, Johnny, is the correct terminology here, and it's very important because the parameters of this debate have swung this way and that over the last little while. This morning, it's going to be Shane Lowry, Open 2019 champion, first Irishman on Irish soil to win the British Open Championship, versus Johnny Sexton's drop goal in the Grand Slam game against what materialised to be the Grand Slam against France.
Yeah, I'm not.
What are you having?
I'm. If I may
Cast
not
your
be,
vote, Johnny. Come on, it's
may not be a rugby man, but I'm certainly not a golf man. But it's easy to kind of love Shane Lowry, and I think that particular victory was a lot more about golf. It was about this lad who like is basically an Offaly football and hurling fan who is one of us, like essentially. Golf may be aloof in many ways, but I think we can relate to Lowry, and everyone basically seems to love him. And you know, coming from the amateur game like he did, I don't know, Adrian. Don't know.
Where are you casting your vote, Johnny, is what I'm asking you.
I'll go with Lowry.
Yeah. I'm in the Lowry camp, I have to say. Both moments actually were very un-Irish, I felt. That the Lowry one, it wasn't quite wire to wire, but it was close. He was maybe one shot back, I think, on JB Holmes after the first day, and then was ahead every other day after that. And obviously romped home, whatever it was, 6 shots in the end. Like, very un-Irish. And then the drop goal was also very un-Irish in that we snatched victory from the jaws of defeat at the last minute with an unbelievable bit of skill.
Is the Six Nations though a bit tainted in the narrative of the last decade for Ireland? Is that like, as we go into 2020 with the Irish rugby team, we're thinking, well, we were crap again at the World Cup. So, like, how important is the Six Nations upcoming? I would say it's very important, but at the same time, even if we were very good in the Six Nations, like, well, that's grand, but like we still can't do it on the global stage.
It's the least important it's always the least important of the cycle of Six Nations, I suppose, given it's removed from the World Cup. But like, I think that's only hindsight. Because at the time when that drop goal goes over, you're losing your mind.
Absolutely. You know? And I, as a newly formed rugby man, you know, going to the game tomorrow, whoever Leinster are playing, Northampton. I do know Northampton. I genuinely am really looking forward to the Six Nations. I think because again, like Dessie Farrell, there's a new regime. I think Farrell will have to change things pretty drastically in terms of the way we play. I think a bit like the football team, the Irish rugby public were getting a little bit fed up with the style of play in the end under Schmidt. I don't know what you think. You'd know a lot more about me, but I think Farrell will try to. Two Farrells, of course. I think Andy Farrell will try to develop a bit more of our off the cuff stuff.
That's going to be the greatest line of the morning. Two Farrells, of course, which is not a thought that had overly struck me, I have to say. But I don't know. Look, it's
both taken over from legends, albeit one slightly tainted by the end.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Anyway, let's not sort of linger very much on Ireland's World Cup campaign because there's nothing more to add on it. But
well, they could easily win the Six Nations. Like they could be a little bet for that because they were odds-on favourites last year. Now I think they're 4-1,
and we will get very excited about it if that happens. But like you say, in the grand scheme of things, really, what's it matter? Because we've become so bloody obsessed now with this World Cup thing. We'll probably forget about it in 18 months' time. But for now, we get to linger in it a little bit more. So anyway, look, that's the debate of the morning. We're actually going to hear a little bit later on from one side of that debate from the Shane Lowry coach, Neil Manship. That's coming your way a little bit later on. But here's a flavour of what's coming your way between now and 9:30 with Johnny and myself. We're going to get stuck into the sports pages in just a minute. Dessie obviously tending to dominate a lot of those. Kenny Cunningham is going to join us at around 8 o'clock. It's an interesting enough weekend actually of Premier League football on the way, so we're going to talk to Kenny about all of that. We're going to discuss Dessie Farrell in the company of Kieran Cunningham. That's on the way a little bit later in the show as well, at about 8:20 or thereabouts. So if you've any comments, questions, any of that stuff, do get them in. We're going to discuss our Sexton-Lowry debate. It is the hot debate of the day, and you can weigh in with your vote if you head along to the...
And we changed the font there.
Twitter feed. Yeah, brand new sort of branding launch. Good to know you've been paying attention for the week, Johnny. It's only been in place since Monday. But
what do you make of that? Because you see the business posts...
You hosted the show one night this week.
No, this day last week.
Well, were you not on the off-ball evening show at some point this week?
What's that?
You hosted the...
I hosted it on Wednesday evening. That was a long day because it was like the soccer the racing awards were the night before, and then we did some racing stuff in the morning and stretched all the way to 10 o'clock. My stamina is definitely on the wane. You have to say.
Oh yeah, it was a late one and you were struggling.
It was late enough, yeah. It was just, but I think by the time the awards were actually given out, it was like 11:30, and that's a fair bit of wine. Like if you're at the table for 4 hours, which we were at that stage, and as much as you could have been like Jim Bulger was sitting beside me, and the lady coming to the table, she kept saying to Jim Bulger, would you like some more wine, sir? Would you like some more wine? Jim Bulger has been teetotal forever, and everyone knows that in racing. I'm pretty sure he probably was wearing his Pioneer badge. But I got great enjoyment out of the fact that she persisted and asked him, did he want some wine? She kept asking me, and I did want wine. So by 11:30, I was like, well, this is your chance now to actually mingle with racing people. It's the only chance a year where you can mingle with so many racing people, be it like JP McManus was there, Aidan O'Brien, Eddie O'Leary and so forth. So it would have been rude to go home. At least that was the slant I was putting on.
That's your logic. That's fair enough. Darrow too was in touch to say that as in
Kim Jong-un.
Kim Jong was on the lash apparently when he was a young lad in
Switzerland.
college in Switzerland. I don't know if this is.
I'm not sure where he got that data. I've watched a few documentaries on Kim Jong-un, and they've referenced this shy basketball fan who was okay at his studies, but they never referenced him being on the lash. So that should be in the next North Korea documentary. He likes the booze.
Here's what else is on the show for you this morning. Coming up a little bit later on, we also are going to be joined by Alan Quinlan. What a weekend of Heineken Champions Cup as well, to look ahead to all the provinces in action getting underway this evening. Quinny is going to preview all of that for us. Enda McNulty is going to also give us his considerations on the appointment of Dessie Farrell. He's a former teammate, obviously, and would have played against Dessie over the years in the various county shirts as well. So we'll get Enda's thoughts on that as well. And, of course, we may also get his thoughts on Ireland's shortcomings at the Rugby World Cup as well, having been involved there. And as I mentioned, Neil Manship is Shane Lowry's main coach and is going to join us on the line at about 9:20. I wonder which way he's going to vote in our poll of the day. Shane Lowry versus Johnny Sexton. So that's what's on the way between now and 9:30 for you this morning. First of all, let's get stuck into the back pages.
OTB AM.
All right, just gone 8:15 on this Friday morning. Delighted to have you along. You're watching OTB AM. It's the sports breakfast show from Off the Ball. Whatever your comments are for the morning, whether they're Kim Jong-un related or not, sort of keen to hear from you. Going to kick things off with the Irish Daily Star this morning. Primarily, I had to read this headline 5 times, Johnny. I mean, I know that's more of a reflection on me than it is the headline writer, but I eventually got it. Christmas.
Well, it's a play
Farrell.
on Carol, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you should have gotten that right.
I should have done.
Yeah.
It was last night, actually, when I saw it, and maybe I was a bit sort of tired and emotional. Christmas...
Here's one for you, right? Of the two Farrells, whose reign will be better? That'd be an interesting poll,
That's a
wouldn't
good poll, yeah. I probably think this guy... He's probably set up... He's coming off the back of a 5 in a row. He's probably set up... It's probably predetermined that he's going to...
Expectations are, like, right to the ceiling, though, whereas... Obviously, with Andy Farrell, it's like, well, you've time to bed things, try new things here.
Yeah.
The team doesn't look anywhere near as good as it did a year ago, whereas he's basically expected to win All Ireland every year.
Well, the other thing is, if
That's
Ireland do
favourite.
win the Six Nations every year for the next 3 or 4 years, like, people will be like, oh yeah, that's great, but like,
What about the World Cup?
What about the World Cup? So that's the difficulty that he has. New Dubs boss hoping veteran Cluxton will give him the perfect gift of staying on. Writes Kieran Cunningham there, and we'll talk to Kieran in just a little bit. Cop Pip United to Minamino. This is the news that Jurgen Klopp seems to have snatched Takumi Minamino from under the nose of Manchester United for a knockdown. I think it's 7 million quid, something like that, from Red Bull Salzburg. An FAI opposed division, writes Mark McCadden here. The FAI looks set to come out against proposals made by a number of rank and file members to split the association, a move that wouldn't go down well, he says, with the with FIFA. That's the Irish Daily Star this morning.
Yeah, the Daily Mail, Pep's secret release clause. Boss could leave at the end of the season with City Chiefs big admirers of Pochettino. Favourite Farrell is the choice for Dublin. Just want to reference Philip Quinn's article on page 49. This is to do with the meeting of the schoolboy FAI, what is it, tomorrow evening, I think.
It's possible disbanding of the under-13 league.
Yeah, I've been speaking to a few guys, so it's obviously Troy Parrott here and Connolly, but calls to the under-13 league to be disbanded. And Philip's on about, I think this meeting is tomorrow night where the SFAI EGM takes place, but there's a big argument that the under-13 league, I've spoken to a few people from sort of the nursery clubs, and as much as they've vested interest in terms of what happens with underage football, they would make a good point that the League of Ireland clubs, a lot of them aren't particularly well set up for underage teams, because this was kind of all foisted upon them. It was one of the things John Delaney was sort of responsible for that I think was very positive, that there's a League of Ireland underage team from under 13 up now, but there's no bridge from 13 to 15, and that's the guy I spoke to from one of the clubs said that if your local League of Ireland team takes a scatter of players from your club, some of their mates get uninterested, and the club can kind of... He said a lot of underage teams have actually disbanded on account of this, but there's another big issue that if you're a 13-year-old and you're good, but you're deemed not quite good enough to be under 15 the following year, that it's almost too ruthless for a kid of that age. Now I think we can be a little bit too like protective about like we all were like players at some age or at some class when we were younger, and we had good days and bad days, and you kind of had to get on with it. But it is a good point that 13 to 15 is probably a bit of a big gap, especially if that 13-year-old is a young 13-year-old. Well,
I was at an under 12 games, as what happened a couple of weeks ago, and they're just the kids are so young. Like there was definitely some players that you would look at and go, Jesus, they were good. They were clearly good. There was like a lad playing centre back that clearly should have been sort of middle of the park dictating play. Like there was lads that you could identify that were very good, but at the same time you were definitely looking at it going, there are players there who will probably come on and come on and come on, and the idea that, you know, at that level you're obviously singling them out for sort of, this guy's destined for greatness and he's going to be plucked from probably by some either League of Ireland club or beyond. But that gap, what I'm saying is that gap at that age group, for
it's
suddenly
big.
to have been that, to now suddenly be going to under 15 after that seems...
It's big, yeah. I think, like, from my own experience, I think it's very important for coaches at that age, whether it's your school team or whatever team it is, not to be totally governed by the victory of the game. Just like make sure these are kids, educate them in the skills of the game, more so than tactics, and educate them and giving them game time, even if it's 5-10 minutes, give them game time, because it's alienating being on the sideline.
6-shooter writes the Irish Examiner this morning. This is obviously in relation to Dessie again. After Gavin Era's famous 5, Dessie Farrell chosen to lead Dublin search for 6 in a row. Plenty more inside as well, including Ronan O'Gara. All Blacks have missed a trick by not appointing Scott Robertson. This is the guy that he worked under at the Crusaders, of course, who was one of the favourites. And certainly it seems as if he was into the last 2 to possibly get that All Blacks gig, but it's gone for Ian Foster. They've gone for Ian Foster instead. Rog says inside, I do wonder, was Razor Robertson even over the heads of some of the decision makers in this process? That he might have just, his presentation might have been just a bit too much for them.
The son, Christmas Prezi Dessie Farrell, has handed the reins. Interesting other Dublin-related story. Also, I should mention this, John Early has resigned from the FAI. I think the FAI sent a statement out at 10:10. And in these times, I can't get my head around the optics of, like, they really should be on the greatest charm offensive of all time at the moment. Obviously, Paul Cook is in, and people don't blame Paul Cook for what's gone on. But, I mean, why are they sending out these important statements at 10:10? Just on page 43, Dubs Kenny Wade to start. It's obviously another little pun there, but don't forget about the Dublin Hurlers, who knocked Galway out of the championship last year and are rebuilding very, very nicely. Keane Boland, one of their stars, was swanning himself around at the HRI Awards the other night. He works for HRI, big racing man, so I'm sure he's buzzing to get going. Don't write off Dublin this year.
The Irish Independent on this Friday morning, there's no sort of front page as such, but the main lead is in relation to Dessie Farrell, of course, and Colm Keys' thoughts there. Dessie won't be intimidated by a room full of all-time greats, I think primarily, and it's very much the same across a lot of the papers, primarily because he knows most of them, he's coached most of them. As one of the writers writes this morning, that he won't have to introduce himself to too many in that Dublin dressing room.
Yeah, might as well put this in the front. There's Boris with his dog. I don't know did the dog look like he or she was really enjoying the trip to Downing Street yesterday?
Where does Boris's hair end and the dog start is probably the main question I would have out of that.
Dylan the dog, Dilyn, which is an abomination of a spelling as well.
Probably sounds, I mean, I know that obviously Dylan Thomas was a Welsh guy and spelled it very differently, but it does sound a little bit Welsh.
The British have very, very strange names. Like they've a large array of strange surnames and so forth, and strange leaders, as it turns out. At the back, Guardiola City deal has break clause. Hamilton had Ferrari talks. Ferrari admitted that he spoke to Lewis Hamilton. Klopp to sign Salzburg star.
The Irish Times this morning, it's rugby all the way here. Jerry Thornley, more settled. Ulster have what it takes to pass Stern's Stoop test. Writes Jerry there ahead of Harlequins against Ulster, which is tonight at 7:45 at the Stoop. Matt Williams is an interesting piece there, which is an open letter to Conor Murray and Ross Byrne, and the short story, particularly in relation to Ross Byrne, is he wants to see a bit more arrogance from him, that he thinks he's a bit too gentlemanly, and actually would like to see him sort of puff his chest out and try and dominate games, because he is sure as hell going to get his opportunity now to put his flag in the ground to be that Ireland first choice 10.
Is Sexton's loss to Leinster even a blow? Would you call it a blow, or does it really matter at this stage?
I mean, I think if you were picking, the question is if you're asking who's a better 10, is that the ultimate
Well,
question?
like, is he?
I mean, I don't think
Sexton with his injuries as well. He's obviously regressing a little bit at this stage.
Well, I
of his
think
life.
because of Burns' undoubted quality, to describe it as a blow would probably be too much, in the way that it might have been sort of, let's say, pre-Carberry's departure, where neither of them, they were kind of splitting things, himself and Carberry, and neither of them were getting probably the opportunity they wanted. So it's not a seismic dent, I suppose, that it might have been a couple of years ago. But like, if you were asking who's the better out half currently, if we were heading into a World Cup, Johnny, let's say, it's got to be Sexton.
Who starts out half for Ireland in the Six Nations?
If everybody's fit.
Definitely Sexton.
If everybody's fit, yeah.
The Daily Telegraph is more on Johnson there. And yeah, actually, it's going to really read the British.
We haven't bothered
papers.
to get the sports section of that one. What's happened there?
Hard work starts for Dessie in the Mirror. Farrell gets the job, delivering 6 in a row, and that is his task. Everton must forget super coaches and give the job to Ferguson. Big dunk, obviously, going into the Man United game at the weekend. Lots of football in the Mirror. Cops, Minor Miracle, and Minamino going to Anfield.
And then the Irish Daily Mail, which is the last one for me. Pep's secret release clause is the story here from Mike Keegan. Boss could leave at the end of the season, with City Chiefs big admirers of Pochettino. I'm sure, why wouldn't they be? So that's the story there. And favourite Farrell is the choice for Dublin. Philip Lanigan here, our reflections on Dessie Farrell's appointment on a 3-year term as the new Dubs boss.
There we are. I think I should have mentioned as well, on the back of the Times, obviously, Mason Greenwood, 18, one of these exciting young players coming through, and it's great to see in this age that Manchester United have these young talents coming through, like Rashford, who basically was born in Manchester, becoming a bit of a star as well. It's actually, sport is weird. Like, Manchester United looked rubbish about 3 weeks ago, and now the stars seem to be aligning, where they've got this very, very fast attacking kind of talent, and they've a pretty easy run of games coming up as well. I think their next 6 games, Solskjaer could be in a position to keep the job for a while.
Was a piece on The Athletic yesterday which said that United have... I'm not actually, and I really feel bad about that every time it comes up, because I really want to.
You're going to admit to reading a piece but not being a subscriber.
No, I didn't read the piece, so
okay,
I just saw the headline.
Yeah.
But I really want to do that, by the way. But,
to subscribe?
Yeah, definitely, 100%. It's not that difficult.
Minutes.
I feel bad about spending the £3 or whatever it is, because I'm not sure I get the value out of it, and I know that's a poor reflection on me than it is on The Athletic. But the point being that an article yesterday where the stat that was dragged up, which is one of the most impressive stats that I've ever seen, that there was a record dating back to, and I might be incorrect on the year, but I think 1921, that 4,000...
37.
Right. 4,000 games running, Manchester United have had a player from the youth team involved in the senior team.
That's fantastic. That's as of 4,000 games running.
Clayton Blackmore saved it in 1992, Tommy tells me. He's obviously read the piece. Now, the one question that I had off the back of it was, how do they even know that? Like,
I know Coventry, you haven't read the piece, as has been pointed out. Coventry City...
How do they know it, though?
My friend's a Coventry City fan, and they've gotten like accolades for bringing more players through their youth system than any club, I think, in the 4 divisions. And I'm a Galway United fan. I love the fact that we've just signed Mikey Place from Dunmore. We've players from various parts of Galway, from the city, we've had players recent years from Glenamaddy, from the west, players from nearby counties that genuinely have some affection for Galway. I don't see the point in supporting a football team that doesn't even have players from your own country, not to mind your own area. Like, why is that football team mean anything to you anymore?
But that's ridiculous now.
No.
To be saying that you wouldn't support a team because they didn't have a player that wasn't from your own country. They had a player that wasn't from your own country.
So, no, if Galway United had 11 non-Irish players playing for Galway United...
whatever about 11. But
11 non-Irish players, and were owned by a non-Irish man who was kind of just there as...
And this is also not, by the way, this is not new news either, like in terms of the makeup of football teams. Like, as somebody who would have been at Sloan Town every week as a kid.
Really? St. Mel's?
Yeah.
You emerged alive.
Yeah.
Mel's is an interesting... Is it still there?
But, no, the area is still there, but the pitch has obviously moved out to Lizzie Woolman.
But is the Mel's pitch gone now?
No, it's well gone, I think. Yeah.
Okay. But anyway, yeah.
But the point being that, like, as a kid, there were some, but there were far fewer at Lone Voices on the pitch than there were Dublin Voices.
Yeah.
Like, it was the first real exposure I would have had to the Dublin accent was various players on the pitch roaring over and back at each other. Like
Yeah, that was
so,
an
like,
indictment of the talent in Athlone. No, I know. And
but it wasn't. It was like it wasn't. It was
Dundalk
just that they were
have
one
very
of
few
the,
Dundalk
It wasn't
players,
an indictment of the talent that was in Athlone.
It was.
It wasn't.
You didn't have enough
more
good
to do with
players
the fact
playing the
that
team.
this was in a team that was an ambitious team who were at that time winning a lot of trophies. Like, we're a very successful team, and it was an indictment of the fact that they wanted to continue to be successful. So the options were fill the team with Athlone players and just accept that you're going to whatever modicum of success is going to come your way, and that's it. Or actually stack it up, as all the better teams do, with the best players you can get.
Yeah, I still find.
Surely you're not worried if a player who plays for Galway is from Dublin or Paris.
I'd nearly prefer Paris, actually. We haven't had many exotic signings, but to make a long story short, I am very encouraged that we've so many good local players, and I think it means a lot more if you develop players like Rashford than just buying lads from Brazil, because like ultimately that's the guy that I could have been. I could have gone to school with, or he's had a similar upbringing to me, and this is my local area, this is my local club. It means something since I was a kid. Like, when you bring in all these foreign players, I think clubs should definitely be encouraged to use their own youth players, because otherwise, what's your identity with the club anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I get some of that.
I get what you're saying about it loan as well. If the players weren't good enough, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
But it should be all about encouraging and promoting your local players, I think.
I think
that's why we love the GAA, because the Westmeath lad is from Westmeath.
Yeah.
And like the Galway lads who won in '98 and the county was brought to a standstill.
You're
they were our
beginning to sound
neighbours.
like a Britain for Britain type.
Vote Boris.
Yeah. You're not challenging that point, which I'll take as an acceptance. By the way, that stat was cropped up in 2013, apparently, when this guy did a meticulous piece of research for his book, Sons of United, and that stat emerged. So it's valid. My scepticism is misfounded, it turns out. Right.